Oh. Oh. Hariom from Milwaukee and Chicago and Cleveland and Niagara. I made it minutes before this workshop was to begin. Our vision is Sangha, which means community, Seva, which means to serve, and Prthvi, which is the divine goddess, those are synonymous, or universal mother. Our community is to serve our universal mother. This is our vision statement. Sometimes a vision can be lost, which is why we have a mission statement also that flows through the acronym LEST. L stands for learn. In January, what we learned was an introduction, an orientation to being part of a community that serves our universal mother. In February, Climate Change 101. In March, Planetary Health. In April, Sustainability, a way of life. This becomes more concrete through E, which is engage. Learning is like jnana. I know this, but how do I live this? That is vijnana. I'm checking in with all of you to share in the chat. How have you changed from January to right now in terms of serving your universal mother? What are some changes in your lifestyle? What are some practices that you now engage in? Please share with me, with all. You've reduced how much plastic you use. You're unplugging appliances when they're not in use. You're using much less central air in your home. Lovely. This flows to support. The S in less is support. Our community has contributed over $100,000 to environmental causes in less than 100 days. And then T, which stands for transform. Right now, there are seekers in this community that are working hard and smart to create a Prthvi Sevasanga guide, a manual whereby every chapter of Chinmaya Mission, every community in America and Canada can nurture Prthvi Sevasanga locally. To have this part of every Balavihar class, to have this part of every Jnana Yajna. I've shared with all of you many times from the age 0 to 23, the training in one's life is called Vrata Samyama. To learn to be disciplined in following through, in being committed. I am proud of our community that is serving our universal mother. You know, all that I've described has happened within 16 weeks. Everything I just talked about has happened in 16 weeks. Can you visualize what we could do in 52 weeks, in 160 weeks? Everyone, please offer your namastes to everyone else for what we've done and what we are going to do together. This morning, when I was in Cleveland, we had our graduation. It was lovely. Many more than 100 people had come. Everyone was chanting and appreciating and eating. And after that, we had a full committee meeting. And the purpose of this meeting was to listen. Everyone who wanted to share got to share in an unrestricted way, because it's important to me for all processes, but specifically the processes I'm involved with, to be democratic, where everyone feels heard, that they're important. What we're going to do for a short period of time now is everyone that's gathered, I want you to fill in a survey of what the past 16 weeks have been like for you, so that we can continue to grow, so we can continue to engage in perpetual betterment. That survey is in the chat now. Please be open and share, because this is us listening. This is democratic. You can click on the link, start to fill this out just for a few minutes. This shouldn't take longer than that. And after that, we'll transition to our next learning. Take your time, but you have 1 more minute. And if you can't complete it by then, you can do so after this workshop. Your contribution is important for us to be able to implement this more deeply in a more diverse way. And pause. We're going to highlight our speaker now and myself as I introduce our presenter, Sapna. Sapna means a dreamer. Did you know that? Sapna is a seeker who lives in the Boston area, where she is involved with the local Chinmaya Mission Center and teaches grade 9 in Balavihar, which is so ideal for Prthvi Sevasanga. Sapna grew up with an affinity for cooking and in a high school summer program she attended focused on agriculture, spurred an early curiosity for where our food comes from, which is so rare. I don't think people are exposed to that anymore. Living in harmony with the environment is a priority for Sapna, and she has explored ways to do so even while living in big cities like New York and Boston. Small adjustments to a lifestyle over time have been steps in this direction, like changing to a vegetarian diet. How many of you have gone through that same change? You've become a vegetarian in your life. Wonderful. Supporting local farmers, and most recently, getting involved in a community garden. Sapna is still learning as she goes on. She has been fortunate to apply her interest to various projects with Vivekji. What an interesting bio I'm reading, and I'm the one who's reading it about myself, sort of. Including collaborating on traditions, a cookbook focused on simple meals for mindful living. And Sapna is also helping with the next book that we're working on together, which is about our samskaras. And on nature-focused chick and chisk retreats in Boston. She aspires most to grow her own food and to visit 50 national parks by the age of 50. That is really cool. I've never heard anyone describe an aspiration like that. In her free time, she enjoys spending time in nature with family and friends. She is grateful for the opportunity to share today and to learn from other participants. And as I had shared earlier, I see that her mother is here, that her husband is here, that her sister is here. And that shows the personality that Sapna is. Sapna, please share.
Thank you, Vivekji and team, for the opportunity to share today. Hariyom, everyone. A little bit of background on my interest. So as Vivekji mentioned, I got first exposed to the ideas of where our food comes from an agricultural focused program I attended in high school. It was a month-long summer program where we learned about the properties of soil, importance of keeping nutrient balance in that. We spent time harvesting in fields. It was quite a transformational experience. I mean, before that, I grew up in a suburb, hadn't really spent much time thinking about where food comes from. It was an immersive experience. We were high schoolers away from home for the first time for a whole month. And it felt really peaceful to be so connected with nature, to spend time thinking about just how the earth offers so much to us. And this sparked an initial curiosity in me that I think I've really carried forth, and I feel fortunate to have had that experience to continue thinking about this. And I think this idea of connection is what I continue to carry with me, this idea of connecting with the earth. I know that, as Vivekji shared, I think I'm still on this journey where I continue to make new sort of commitments and make small adjustments to my lifestyle, nowhere near perfect. But I think that feeling of connection with the earth and feeling like each of these changes is towards that, that has been almost a practice of gratitude for me towards all the earth offers to me. So after I graduated college and moved to my first big city of New York, I started living on my own. And for anyone else that lives in a large city, I noticed how fast the lifestyle was. I recognized the excess of materials and waste in general that's just used to sustain the lifestyle, also in foods. So as a young professional, I was one of others on the subway that would bring a single-use coffee cup, that I'd pick up my morning coffee from. And I started noticing the waste, the single-use cups just floating around, often outside of bins, which made me, feel really bad to see it in public parks, and just kind of small indications of where else it might be, already maybe polluting our waterways. And that really struck me, and I decided I no longer wanted to contribute to polluting the earth with that. So I began challenging myself not to use single-use cups altogether. I did this by actually carrying a reusable mug with me wherever I'd go. And then if I did not have it for whatever reason, I just wouldn't buy anything. And I noticed Miraji also commented something similar as a commitment she's made in the chat. It was a small, it could feel inconvenient to me to make this change. But every time I would think about using that single-use cup, I would think, is it really worth it? Do I need this? Is it worth the impact that it makes long after I'm gone? And for a few years, that was my thing that I would try to keep up with. I will say it has become more challenging during the pandemic, when also due to hygiene reasons, many places do not accept a cup. But also that's been an opportunity to simplify habits by just staying at home and eating at home more. I think it's important for everyone to have some sort of a commitment that resonates with them. This was a small habit that seemed within my control and something that I could change. And just practicing it over time, it reinforced that habit into a practice. And it also encouraged me to notice places where, the coffee shops, for example, serve customers directly in reusable wares, are also doing their part in serving the environment. And those are often the places also that encourage people to sit and enjoy their coffee, for example, with others. So it also encourages this communal, sort of slower lifestyle, rather than being go, go, go all the time. Another example was to try to reduce my use of plastic by bringing reusable bags with me to grocery shopping. And I would walk and take public transit wherever I'd go. So focusing on only buying what I could carry with me, which prevented me from then overstocking and leading to, having to throw things away. So it also helped control waste. I also started to think more about packaged food in general. So not only what comes packaged in a grocery, but also my use of, say, takeout containers, plastic containers. The first job I took out of college, I was traveling every week. I would spend maybe 4 days in a different city. And so that lifestyle in itself required a lot of waste and resources just to sustain, because I was, having to eat out a lot more than I was used to. And I would also notice myself feeling physically less well, engaging in that sort of faster food lifestyle. So even with that, I decided I would start packing some of my food and taking it with me. And it took some time and, planning beforehand. But I thought it was worth it. It was like time I was spending doing something for the environment. And yes, Vivekji, Taco Bell uses very little packaging. So that is an exception, of course. So it also allowed me to eat things that were, homemade and made me feel better, physically better as well. And I thought, again, it was something that was in really my control. Why not do what I could also to reduce the use of packaging? I realized I actually want to pause there and share a couple of icebreaker questions. I apologize. I got swept into the intro and went straight into my part, but I also wanted to pause here and maybe give others also a chance to think about this topic a bit. So what do we know about our food? So from the article, I shared that about a fourth of all greenhouse gas emissions come from global food systems. So of course, our food choices matter. And you can share your answer in the chat. The first question is, how long before we buy it was the average apple picked from a tree? From a typical grocery store. Okay, I'm seeing 7 days, 12 days, 14 days, few months, 4 months, 1 month, months, okay? Okay, so actually the average apple has been picked for 12 to 14 months before we access it. This is based on US grocery stores, but I'm sure Canada is pretty much the same. So this means that the apples that we enjoy, of course, for those that maybe live by where you might go apple picking, you know that they typically grow in the autumn or the fall. Less fresh also means less nutrients. So apples stored for a year, why this matters is actually they have almost no antioxidants remaining. And of course, it also takes resources to cool and store those for that long. And so that in itself has an environmental impact. Next question, which source of protein has the lowest impact by greenhouse gas emissions? So I'm seeing split guesses between tofu, lentils, and nuts. Okay, seeing quite a few saying either tofu or lentils. Actually, it is lentils. So lentils have the lowest full life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions. So please keep enjoying your dal at home. Lentils are actually quite important to crop rotation because they require less fertilizers. They help maintain the fertility of soil. They actually have a positive impact on soil quality. So they help also feed soil microbes, the organisms that then keep other plants also fertile from the soil. And then they also have a lower water footprint than meats, and then also soybeans. So this one is also an interesting one. How long does it take for a plastic bottle to biodegrade? So in the case it does not make it into a recycling bin, but we throw it away in the trash. Okay, I'm seeing years, some saying never, 500, forever. So this shows a chart of how long it takes some of our typical food packaging to biodegrade. We see plastic bottles here take almost 500 years. Even the plastic bags I was just talking about from a grocery store, that takes about 50 years. Of course, we know that we can recycle, but maybe we've also recently heard that our recycling is not always the most effective, right? Depending on where we live and where we send it, if it actually is being recycled. And so this is another sort of motivator, I hope, for why we should try to reduce some of our use of food packaging when we can control it. So hope that also gave a little bit more inspiration to why we're speaking about this topic. I wanted to shift also to talk a bit about more current practices I'm working on now that I've transitioned to Boston. I've been seeking other ways to reduce my environmental impact. One has been to support a local CSA. So a CSA means a community supported agriculture. Essentially, it is a program through which community members can support a local farmer. So we pay a farmer upfront, almost a whole season before they are actually planting their vegetables and fruits. And that allows them actually to then go purchase their seeds, procure materials, and plan so that they don't have to rely only on retail stores and grocery stores. So it supports their business as well. We pay them upfront. Then during the season, every week we pick up a box. It's sort of a mystery box. We never know what will be in it. It's equally divided among all of the community members that are participating in the share, and it contains different fruits and vegetables. It is a real joy and surprise to see what comes every week because, it never can plan for what will be there. I like to cook, so it's been interesting seeing what's growing local in the Boston area. Like, for example, we'd get things like kohlrabi, which I had never heard of, and then had to figure out what to do with it. And then sometimes we'd get 40 cucumbers in the box, and then again have to figure out what to do with that. But it teaches appreciation of just letting nature kind of direct the course of what I eat rather than basing off of just preference by going to the grocery store. It kind of simplifies that part of life to just go with the farm share and allow that to kind of dictate diet. Unlike the grocery store produce, which we just learned may not always be the freshest, I think the real benefit of these kinds of farm shares or even shopping at the farmer's market is that we're talking on the scale of days before something's been picked from the plant that we actually eat it. And so it also then gives the plant the optimal chance of giving us the nutrients that we need to go on with our lives and continue with our responsibilities. So I think there's a physical health benefit there as well. As of last year, I've also, it's a bit of a pandemic hobby, but started to explore gardening with a few friends in a community plot. And that also has been a real adventure because I'm still learning as we go. I think it's been a lesson in both patience and humility in terms of there's so much out of our control. There's so much just grace involved in what actually comes from the plot. But it's time spent tending, to the earth and doing it with others also in this community setting, seeing others also spend their time towards the environment is so powerful. I mean, it's why I think joining these sessions also is so powerful in just having that feeling of camaraderie and support. And that also has been a way then to feel more connected with nature, with where my food is coming from. As my bio shared, I do hope to eventually be able to grow most of my own food. But until then, doing small efforts like this, I think in the meantime, have at least taught me what's out there, started to give me hints of what's out there. I've also been thinking a lot about how eating sustainably isn't something I just want for myself or my family, but also something I'd like to share with my community. And so I wanted to share about some organizations I've come across and volunteered with to this end, in case. And I'd love to hear in the chat if others also have explored similar ones in their area. So one that I've been involved with is called City Sprouts. They are tasked with teaching the next generation of leaders, so our kids, with where our food comes from. They set up gardens in elementary schools and middle schools. Over the summer, those gardens need people to take care of them. So that's where myself and others in my community have been contributing. We would water, weed, and harvest to ensure that the plants continue to bear fruit, so that when kids come back in the fall, they actually get a chance to see where their vegetables come from a plant. I shared that in high school, I had this really, amazing eye-opening experience for me to actually see where food was grown and coming from. And just that has inspired me with, I'd love to share that with kids as early as, they can see that, whether it's, gardening at home or having opportunities like this through school, so that they also feel it's within access for us to sustain ourselves with food that we grow for ourselves. Another organization is called City Harvest. So this one focuses on rescuing produce from farms that may have excess, and basically produce that may not make it to a grocery store or a retail center, and sharing this food with vulnerable and food insecure communities. I think this one is also really important to me. I was involved in it while I was living in New York. Oftentimes in food pantries, I've noticed for good reason, right? They collect shelf-stable packaged foods that they can distribute. But I think this also gave the chance to share with communities in need fresh fruits and veggies. I know many of the changes I've spoken to, I think also I acknowledge the financial privilege that comes with being able to make those changes. And so I think that's why in general, these organizations that also do a part to share this with others have been meaningful to me. And most recently in Boston, our Chinmaya Mission Boston community supports this interfaith community garden that's in the Andover area, which grows fresh vegetables and then shares that with food security organizations in Greater Boston. So as a mission family, we've gone together to volunteer. Shameless plug for those that come to our retreat this August. We've also set up to volunteer there together and garden and harvest, so that the vegetables can be shared with the Boston community. These are, initiatives that I've come across. I see others also sharing in the chat, like Imperfect Foods. I think it's nice to know, there are other organizations out there, right, that are continually also thinking about this. It's been, I think after this self-awareness journey, there's this next step of, finding what else I'd, like to get involved with outside of just my own personal habits. So I'll end with just three sort of reflections from my side. One is around what I think are some of the physical benefits of fresher foods. I actually think fresher foods are better for my physical health, for our physical health. Without getting too much into the scientific data, we get more nutrients, right, from fresher food. I also think there is an element to the energy and intention with which it's grown. So similar to how I believe that when food is prepared with love, it has this sort of healing and comforting power for us. The same is true with how plants are grown in the earth. And so that's why I feel, even if I cannot personally grow all my own food, knowing who is growing it, supporting a local farmer is important, because we know that they're doing it then with that positive intention and care towards the earth, and they're doing it with responsible practices that allow for harvest to continue to serve others after us as well. the next point is that I think one of the most critical resources to making any change in sustainable eating, and perhaps we can say living a sustainable lifestyle in general, is time. So even with, for example, reducing use of packaging for food, taking my own meals, etc., I acknowledge there's time element to that. Of course, packaged food, I think, is designed to be more convenient. It's easy. But I think putting some planning in ahead, swapping things out where we can, those are ways to start pushing ourselves to go further into reducing our impact or reducing our environmental impact. So nowadays, I've been trying to just buy less packaged food. So, for example, if I'm buying nuts or lentils or something, buying those things that I use frequently in bulk so that I reduce the initial packaging and then portioning it off as I need. I've also been trying to eat more fruits and veggies, so fresh things as snacks versus packaged things. After several science experiments in the kitchen, now can finally make yogurt, so I'm avoiding buying containers for that as well. And all these changes do, of course, take more time, but I also think about it as spending time doing something for the environment. And then it feels quite doable to plan around. And then lastly, on the note of eating what's in season, supporting local farmers that are growing what can grow in my area, I think it encourages a simpler lifestyle. As mentioned, I think it's a real joy to leave the decision of what to eat to just allow nature to sort of dictate that based on what's coming in the box. And it just creates a sense of gratitude for what I get, rather than feeling like I should base so much of those sort of simpler decisions anyway on my preferences, instead just letting kind of nature take care of that. So those were the main things I wanted to share. And I actually wanted everyone to have a chance to maybe reflect a bit more on this. So let me share a couple of questions I have as sort of a self-assessment on sustainable eating practices. Okay. So these first set of questions are about recent eating habits. The first one is, in the past 24 hours, how many of the foods you ate were packaged? And you might want to have a sheet of paper to write these down, or even just think about it, take a mental note. In the past week, how many times have you thrown out food because it had gone bad? So this could be produce that you brought into the home and then didn't consume in time, or food that you'd prepared, but then just didn't get to consuming in time. Okay. In the past month, how many plastic grocery bags have you brought into the home? So you might think about your shopping schedule, how much you typically buy, and how many bags you're taking from the store, plastic bags, if you're using those. And then the last question here is, in the past month, how many plastic water bottles or single-use cups have you used? And for this one, maybe also try to think about the scenarios or situations you were in which you might have had to use these. Okay. So these next set of questions are about aspiring towards a zero waste kitchen. So the first question is, which do you produce the most of in your kitchen? Trash, recycling, or compost? Next, what are ways to prevent wasting food, both produce and prepared foods? So think about maybe ways you might think about doing this, or perhaps ways that you already manage this. And the third question here is, what are some alternatives you can implement to package snacks and foods? So for this one, it might be helpful to think about even one packaged snack you really enjoy and what you might do to consider an alternative or replacement to that. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop eating it, right? There are ways, as mentioned, where you could buy in a larger packaging to begin with. Other ways that you could think about actually reducing the packaging involved there. All right. The last question is, what is one new sustainable eating practice you will commit to? And so for this one, even if you weren't writing the others down, please see if you can find either a Post-it or a small note that you can later put on your fridge to remind yourself in the kitchen about this habit. Some ideas could be to reduce packaging, to use reusable bags at the grocery store, reducing consumption of packaged foods, shopping local, start composting at home, or growing some of your own food, or anything else that you can think of. All right, hopefully you have had enough time to write something down. At this point, actually, we'd like to hear from you. It could be any reflections you've had so far on this topic. You could share with us the new practice that you'd like to commit to, anything that surprised you about the other questions and what we've discussed today. So I'll stop sharing, and maybe you could virtually raise your hand so that we can hear from you as well.
I became a pescatarian because I used to eat meat, but I didn't want to encourage people to kill animals for their meat by eating it. So like refusing red and white meat would stop people from killing the animals.
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, and it's healthier, I heard.
Anyone else want to share?
Swapna, nice to hear you again, and happy that you are sharing about CSA and everything. Yeah, I'm also a part of CSA at some point, but after that I started growing vegetables on my own. And my father is and my grandfather is a farmer, and my father is a veterinarian, and he worked in agriculture college. So what are the things you said? I can correlate that, and definitely, if someone wants to try gardening, please do so, and I encourage that. And the feedback from the plants that motivates us to do more and more, and even the vegetable tastes are so awesome, and whatever you cook, even we don't know cooking, whatever the produce we get from that, it definitely turns into awesome food. So thank you for sharing, and I can relate so much with you, Swapna. Thanks.
Thank you, Meenaji. Yeah, Mukul's raising his hand.
Thought that was an awesome presentation. Thanks, Sapna. I think one thing that kind of jumps out when I hear things like this is just like how it goes hand in hand with like Ayurveda and all these other things of like healthy living kind of leads to sustainable living.
Mhm.
So that was just something I noticed when you talked about like the apples being picked 12 to 14 months ahead of time. That kind of blew my mind. And then it's just like the idea that the healthier we eat, which is like more seasonable stuff as well as recently picked, leads to also a better global environment.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mukul. I think it's almost returning to probably the way things were before. I think we've gotten so used to now having access to whatever we want to eat all year round, when if we think about it, that's not really how the world or nature is supposed to work. And so even if we try to reduce some of our consumption of non-local produce, I think that's a place to start. So by at least buying some local produce.
I was starting to look into the CSAs. Do you know if like how much food comes usually? Like, is it too much for 2 people? And then can you get options for like not having eggs or eggs? I don't know what.
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, so we get one for just our household of 2. So absolutely, they have what they call either a small share for a smaller family, which they say sustains 1 to 2, or they have one for 3 to 4 individuals. And you can choose what comes in the box in terms of, you can sign up for just vegetables, mushrooms as a separate add-on. So for example, we don't get eggs from ours. So those kinds of choices that you want to make, you can make.
Hariom, Sapna ji, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I had a question, and this is related with the point that you mentioned about apples being packed 12 to 14 months ahead of when we get it in our local stores. So do you personally buy any fruits from grocery stores? If so, what fruit has the most nutrient value and the least shelf life by the time we go and pick it up from a grocery store? I understand preferably we want to buy it from local farmers market, but if there are fruits that can be bought from a grocery store, what is the most recommended one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think to your point, I think it's really difficult to completely stop buying even fruits that, we probably need to consume, but it is really about more of balancing the nutrition as well. I typically look actually at if I'm buying fruits from the grocery store, where it's coming from. If I know it's coming from a neighboring state, often citrus is like that for many parts of the US. I would look for that as an alternative to maybe buying things that have been stored for a long time.
Hariom, thank you so much for the presentation. I was just wondering, like, I know, like, as like a, like a lot of food is like bought in like very large like quantities. I was wondering, like oftentimes like me or my friends would like resort to like freezing the food. So then you kind of run into the problem of like should you have an additional freezer to like freeze your food and like stop waste, or like just I'm not sure how to like really handle that, because like so much of it is sold in like bulk.
That's a great question, Akshaya. I try to think about this from the lens of keeping things as simple as possible. So if it means ensuring that the quantity of food we bring is something that we can actually store, whether that includes the freezing method as well, just with the space that we have. That's at least how I go about it. Curious if anyone else also wants to share how they would kind of navigate that. In terms of I typically try to buy in bulk, those are things that I think I either store dry, like lentils, etc., and things that have a longer sort of stabler shelf life. If I'm looking at more produce and things that are supposed to be used while fresh, those I try to buy just enough that I know I'd be able to finish. And I think that's where some of these either local markets, farmers markets, CSAs, they kind of enable that also by letting you buy things in kind of the quantities that you want, rather than maybe already packaged. Meenakshi ji has shared also in the chat. We can also make fresh food from by sprouting lentils, which is also a lovely, lovely suggestion and something that we can do in the winter. Okay, there's a question from Prthvi on, other than not buying it altogether, any ideas on takeout food and reducing packaging waste? So one suggestion is, when possible, to enjoy the food in the establishment itself. That way there is an avoidance of the containers. Oftentimes, if I'm going to a restaurant, even in my area, and I know this may not always be possible with, especially after the pandemic with hygiene restrictions, but some places I've brought my own container to take my leftovers back with me. So that's also something to be considered. Ravi asked a question, if one had to choose between local or organic food, what would be your recommendation? Personally, I would go for local. To give an example, for me on the East Coast in Boston, to buy organic lettuce coming from California would be incredibly resource intensive for it to be flown, because it's something that perishes quite quickly, likely flown all the way from there over to me. And so in that case, I would try to first look for what is local to my area.
Sapna, this was just inspiring, and just like, okay, yes, we can keep doing it. Sometimes seems very hard to do all these things. The one thing we've been noticing quite more when I go to the Indian store, most of our Indian packaging never even has a recycling symbol on it. And just this sense of upset comes in, not the right thing to do, but like, okay, our Indian packaging companies in New Jersey, and none of them are, why aren't they putting a symbol on it? And not sure more than writing letters to them what could be done. And I was just thinking about it right now as you were talking. So just sharing if they have any thoughts, or anyone has any thoughts.
Yeah, curious to hear what others also might have to say. One thing I've thought about is either buying in larger, bulk packages when I can, so that then over time, I'm using less. That doesn't completely solve the problem, but maybe one way. I've also recently come to know of some zero waste stores. I haven't personally checked these out myself, but even searching that online, there are some that they do ship, but they're shipping in, completely, I guess, biodegradable or recyclable packages. And they also, stock a lot of the lentils and things that we might find at the Indian store. So that might be one way also to consider. It's quite interesting because anytime I go visit my family in India, I notice that they're quite easily able to bring their own, containers and packaging to places to get these whatever foods back to their home. And it's disappointing that we don't yet have the same here. I think, Julie, you had also shared there are stores, though, that maybe not for Indian goods yet, but they are serving, or they are stocking things that we can buy in bulk in our own containers. So looking for those alternatives where we can also is a good practice. In the meantime, there's also a question in the chat from Rishi that is asking about, speaking about how being involved in a community garden has affected my relationship with food and eating. I think it just reinforces that connection from where our food comes from. And so that adds to the feeling of gratitude that comes from every meal. And also, being able to share if we grow something, and being able to share that with others also, it's very fulfilling to feel like, the time and effort put into something is serving not only me, but other people also. I'm also just seeing some questions in the chat here. So there was one from Julie on, what do we do in the winter? CSAs and farmers markets are not available in my area. Yes, agree. It can be quite difficult, at least in my home. That's when we resort more to some of our dry goods, like beans and lentils and rices. My area does actually offer a CSA. The winter CSA tends to be things that I don't think we'd be able to finish all in one go. So the same quantity will come, but it will be a lot of potatoes and squashes. It would be quite difficult for my family of two to finish. And so for that reason, I haven't gone for that option. I do think, though, even from what we get in the summer, for example, looking into the ways to properly freeze things right after they come also is a helpful potential alternative to at least bring some of that into the winter. So without going too deep into the science, freezing does actually retain some of the nutrients that would actually degrade over time if we keep something only in the fridge or out on a shelf. Rita has a question. Would you say most local farmers follow organic methods? I would say yes. I would also maybe not always is organic the only label that we should consider. At least in the US, I understand there are pretty strict guidelines that farmers have to follow, quite expensive methods to get them that label to then put organic on their foods. There are so many other labels that are out there also that show that they're responsible. I would look at sort of those farm directories, looking at reviews also and what they share directly on their kind of methods of how they approach farming. That also can share, that they're responsible in their methods. Yeah, I do want to read out Meenakshiji's answer to Rita's question on organic. So the label is not always a guarantee of organic, and she shares the best way is to ensure making time to visit the farms, offering to help out. That's also a way to build that connection to understand the process.
Hariom Sapna, I actually have another question.
Sure.
I think you had mentioned that, I think it was in your article about or maybe in the chart that you showed about certain dairy products are more harmful with the greenhouse gas emissions. And I think you mentioned cheese.
Yes.
What's the deal?
I think it's the additional processing that's involved there as well. So it takes more time and energy to process. And so that's why.
Sapna, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You've been involved with many different chapters of Chinmaya Mission. How do we encourage decision makers to follow the path of Shreya, meaning reallocating funds from paying a mortgage or making the mandir look better to using materials that are compostable and so on, which is more following the path of Shreya rather than Preya? How do you encourage them to make those decisions? Is the question clear?
The question is clear, Vivekji. I'm not sure I have the best answer. My thought would be, I think it takes a bit more of advocacy from community members that also care about this, to share that with those. If, for example, I'm not on the board of my current chapter, but sharing that with those that are, using my platform as a Valvihar teacher, for example, to also educate the next generation that will continue to grow up in our centers. That's how I would think about continuing with this. And I also think the book initiative that the team is putting together will also help in continuing with that advocacy. We can think about, can this community also take that back to the local centers and sit down with the board, for example, and go through those practices as well.
Hariom, thank you, Sapna, so much. This was so informative. We'll start, we're actually going to close for now. However, if anyone else would like to stay after, we can, Sapna is willing to stay back and answer more of our questions. Thank you, Sapna. A couple of announcements. We have 3 new opportunities for giving back to Earth, focused on air, water, and earth. And we encourage everybody to visit our the link in the chat to read more about those initiatives. For air, we're supporting the Clean Air Task Force. Water, we are supporting Ocean Conservancy. And for earth, it's the World Wildlife Fund in Bharat, supporting the elephants and tigers. So please do read the descriptions and visit those links to get more information. And for next month, our workshop is scheduled for Sunday, June 26th. And we'll actually continue with this topic on food with a focus on food waste. So we'll look forward to seeing everyone there. And if anybody would like to stay back, please do so.
Okay, thank you very much, Sapna. I think a lot of what you shared, we know, but it requires courage to follow through with it. And when we get to listen to people like you, Meenakshi, Hamsa, Himali, etc., then it helps us to nurture the courage that you can do it so we can do it too. And that's very much the focus of our Prthvi Sevasanga, which is that transform. That if 500 people are transformed in our community and we can share this with 3 more, that's 1,500 people, and it just keeps growing like that. That's why I was appreciative of your answer, and specifically how you use the word advocacy. That's a thought flow that we're very much going to integrate into the manual that we're creating for this to be a Earth advocacy manual, something relating to that. So again, thank you for your dedication and your sacrifice. And we all pray for you to continue to be courageous so we can also be the same way. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.